Hi, everyone. It's Danielle. Galit and I created a live Nightingale of Iran show that we've performed all over the U.S. And we just took our show on the road to the U.K. The week we were in London, we were featured on a British podcast, the Family Histories podcast, a show that celebrates people like us who've pieced together their family stories. We had a great conversation with the host, Andrew Martin. So today, we're sharing it with you. Enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to the Family Histories podcast, the show for and about those of us who are sat quietly in libraries, archives, and spare rooms all around the world, tirelessly piecing together our collective social and family history. My name is Andrew Martin. I'm a family historian, and I'll be your host. In this episode, The Nightingale, we'll be hearing about a man whose musical career took off in a power cut, and we'll be on the hunt for some television footage from 1960s Iran. So, put down that old diary, grab a cuppa, and let's meet our guest. Today, listeners, I don't have a guest. I have two guests, the first of whom is an Emmy Award-winning documentary writer and producer, an author, a former TV news reporter, and co-founder of a live storytelling show called Story Boom. And joining us is her sister, who's a musician and composer and anthropologist of Middle Eastern Jewish culture, who has held assistant professor positions in New York and is a fellow of the University of Pennsylvania's Katz Center. Most recently, they have pooled their skills of research, storytelling, and music to bring us the podcast series The Nightingale of Iran, which explores their family's Mizrahi Jewish musical roots. So, having sung their praises, and before I'm met with a chorus of "get on with it," I really should welcome my guests, Danielle and Dr. Galit Dardashti. Hello, Danielle and Galit. Welcome to the Family Histories podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. We're glad to be here.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm very excited that you're both here. So, that introduction certainly paints a rich canvas of work. I think you must be both very busy, but let's take a step back first to find out how and when you began to research your family's history.
Yeah, so our grandfather was one of the most famous singers of Persian classical music in Iran in the 1950s and 1960s.
Okay.
He lived in Tehran.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was a huge star, and we always knew this growing up. You know, we were told stories from our family ever since we were small kids. And we actually had met our grandfather. We knew him. We didn't know him very well, but we knew him from, whenever we were in spaces where, people would beg him to sing, and that kind of thing.
Wow.
So we knew he was this big star in Iran. He would sing, he had a weekly spot on Iranian national radio. He sang concerts at the biggest concert halls in Tehran and throughout Iran, and he was often asked to sing for the Shah in the Shah's palace. So this is the background of our grandfather.
So having known that he was famous, did that mean that there were lots of things that you could use to kind of research his life and maybe those who came before him?
Well, it's interesting because, I'm an anthropologist. I had originally thought I'd be able to go to Iran and do research on his life, but I wasn't able to do that. It seemed dangerous for me since, our grandfather was this star that was beloved by the Shah.
Right.
So even though musically, I would say I had at least attempted to try to get to know his music over the years, much more recently, especially.
Yeah.
These stories about him, we really didn't know. we really didn't know very much, other than kind of these big stories that our father and our uncles and aunt would tell us over and over again about how famous he was and amazing he was. And we found once we started, Danielle and I doing the research for this project together, we found that was true. Absolutely, that he was hugely famous. But there was much more to the story that we hadn't understood about the parameters of his fame.
For instance, our father, when he was a teenager, so this is the oldest son of the Nightingale of Iran, our father, when he was 19 years old, became a pop star in Tehran, a teen idol, and had his own show on television.
Wow.
And in the stories that our father told when we were kids, it was always like, I was a teen idol on TV in Tehran. And then 6 months after getting my own show, I just decided to leave and just give it all up because I wanted to go to college in America. And, we never really questioned that or really thought critically about any of the why did they really leave kind of thing, because it was always told to us like this magical fairy tale that was so beautiful. It just seemed sort of like, why question it?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Galit and I started working on this project that we really dug in and asked the really hard questions to not just our father and our father's siblings, but lots of other friends, family, fans, historians, scholars, musicians all over the world about what the situation was really like at that time in Iran and why it may not have been that difficult for them to give it all up and leave. Yeah. And our podcast tells the story and gives that all away.
Wow. So what was your family's reaction to researching? I mean, obviously you have made the podcast, so there's been some cooperation, but were they kind of desperate to help you with that? Or were they kind of a little bit cautious as to what you might uncover?
It's interesting. They were all very, very receptive. Our father was very, very excited about us researching his story. But I do think he wasn't thinking we were going to go as deep as we did, but then he was fantastic. He was so wonderful. I think the deeper we went, it was a difficult process. We kind of, we were gentle with him in sort of taking him along and sharing where we were going with the story. But he also was really amazing and really also interested in exploring the story and going to new depths with it with us.
Yeah. And just echoing what Danielle's saying, I think it was very, very exciting for him to have us to see his whole life story and his father's life story, his whole family's life story with a new lens. That's really exciting to kind of rethink things that you had been thinking about in a certain way your whole life. And then kind of with a new, just a new way of thinking of things was actually really exciting for him. And there was not a lot of resistance.
Yeah, I think it was hard. I think some of it was not so easy, but we were really, really careful to do it always with love and curiosity, and this wasn't some kind of an expose. Even the hard stuff, we approached it always with a lot of love, and I think it was an amazing process for our family, really understanding our family story in many new ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the very first episode, I think, of the Nightingale of Iran, you talk about encountering this trove of audio recordings. What was that like to discover those?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. My husband and I were living in my parents' house for a few months while they were out of town. We were like house sitting for them while some renovations were being done in our own house. And I was one day doing laundry in their basement and discovered these cardboard boxes and plastic boxes, like tons of boxes full of hundreds and hundreds of audio tapes from the 1960s and 70s and beyond. And these are like these old gray reel-to-reel audio tapes that Galit and I called Galit and I said, you got to come over here. You got to see what I found. And it was really like finding a treasure chest. And she and I went and got all of these tapes digitized. Not all of them, not like all hundreds and hundreds of them, but we kind of tried to figure out which ones we should start with and digitize some.
Okay.
These reel-to-reels, we had no way of listening to them.
No.
There was just no, we didn't have that technology anymore.
No, but it's all old tech now.
So we really had to find a professional to help us kind of discover and sift through and figure out what we actually had there. And when we discovered what we had, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was mind-blowing.
Danielle and I, we had already decided that we were creating a podcast.
Okay, yeah.
But it was really just fortuitous that we found these recordings, because it would have been a very different podcast if Danielle hadn't kind of come across these recordings.
Yeah.
What she ended up finding were these recordings that were, some of them hours long, that our family sent between New York and Iran and in Israel, because long distance calls were so expensive in those days.
Okay.
People didn't just pick up the phone and call each other, so they would basically record these long voice memos to one another. And our family happens to be a family that expresses their love to one another through music. And so not only are they telling amazing stories or just telling kind of mundane things in these recordings, like, oh, we got our first phone today, in the 1960s, or, just this is what, Danielle's doing in school today. But they also recorded music, playing the piano, playing the guitar, singing in harmony for each other. And this was just the most amazing thing to discover and to hear our family, our grandparents, our parents, our uncles, aunts, talking, just like they're right here next to us, but from so many years ago. So it was like we were experiencing time travel.
Yeah, and I guess in a way these audio recordings, whilst they were recording what was perhaps mundane things for them then, as well as some of the special occasions, they are kind of filling in the gaps that you have because the documented evidence isn't available to you because of various different reasons, but they're also perhaps filling in the stuff that wouldn't have been in the documents anyway. And therefore, they are painting a much fuller, richer, and perhaps more honest portrait of your family history.
Yeah, and they even recorded holidays and special occasions, birthday parties, and Friday night dinners with the family. And you could even hear a change over the years in their customs and the kinds of things that they did as our father assimilated when he moved to America and kind of shed his Iranian-ness and started becoming an American Ashkenazi cantor as he became. So, it was amazing. It was like an audio diary over the years that we were able to explore and visit.
Were all of these different formats in fairly good condition? And, I can't fathom just how difficult it must have been to pick which ones to listen to first or which ones to get digitized.
It was insane. I mean, so to answer your question about good condition, like I was shocked by how clear these voices were, how it was like I was sitting right there with them. It was like this conversation we're having with you right now, that clear. And as far as which ones to pick, I mean, honestly, there may be many, many, many more that we haven't heard yet that are just as fabulous that are down there. I swear. It's like it was an insane process deciding which ones, because you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of tapes and hours of recording on each tape.
Yeah.
So what we did was and a lot of the descriptions on the tapes are written in Persian, and Galit and I do not read in Persian. And so we had to get the labels translated, and then based on what it said on the label and the year that it was from, we would say, oh, wow, I want to hear that, And so we did digitize most of the tapes that were from the earliest years.
Right. Okay.
And then when you start getting into the 70s and 80s and tapes that were cassette tapes and VHS tapes and beta tapes and all kinds of other tapes, we didn't digitize and translate all of those, because for many of those, we were actually alive and around for some of those things. We did get some of those translated from special occasions, like when our family had just returned from spending a half a year in Mexico. And when we, there were some tapes that we were dying to hear what was on them and hear our own voices as little kids on the tapes. But those early ones from the 60s, when our father first came to America, we digitized most all of those. There were a few that seemed to have very little on them based on the label.
So having produced the podcast and done all of this research and listening to all of these recordings, what has that taught you about yourself?
Are you asking both of us?
Yeah, let's see if they're different.
Well, first of all, for me, on a very basic level, before this project, really wasn't very Persian at all and didn't feel a very strong connection to my Persianness. Unlike Galit, who has done a lot of research in Middle Eastern Jewish culture, my career hasn't really focused on that. And we really didn't have a lot of Persian culture in our upbringing. So I think one of the things that this project has done for me is sort of heightened my sort of sense of that part of my identity. Okay. I do feel now like that's a big part of my identity. It's really interesting, but it has transformed me in that way. I also think that really this emphasis on preserving family stories, which I always have been obsessed with, is even heightened, where I just can't encourage people enough to record the people that they love around them, telling the stories of their lives while they still can. This project was so incredible for our family. And I think it's, while not everyone can produce a podcast series, a documentary series like the one Galit and I did together because of our combined talents, I think everyone has access to voice recording devices and things on their phones these days.
True. Yeah.
And you can just hit record and preserve some of those stories. So I think for me, it's even really intensified that part of me, and that I'm sort of an evangelist now of like preserve your stories,
Music to my ears.
Danielle said a lot already, so I'll just add a little bit and say that, for me personally, this has been so exciting. First of all, Danielle and I have never worked on a project together, and I think never imagined that we would work on a project together. But, when I applied to graduate school, a big impetus for me in applying to graduate school was exploring my family background. I wrote all about our grandfather when I applied to graduate school, and I said what I wanted to research as an anthropologist. And I had envisioned going to Iran. That was, that was my goal as an anthropologist. And it quickly became clear that I could not go to Iran. Once I started graduate school, politics shifted, and I had to kind of change course. I as an anthropologist, I didn't want to do research in the United States. I wanted to go to another culture and immerse myself. And so that research on my grandfather kind of got left behind, and I only really pursued it as a musician. And, it was a part of my academic work, but much, much in the background. And so in doing this project with Danielle, it's really come full circle. And I all kind of combined my academic and artistic and, familial desires. And we created something that very different than what I would have created alone. So it's been very, very exciting for me on multiple levels. So exciting for our family. And, it's been really meaningful for me personally.
As we research our family's history, we often stumble across ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Good things, or, well, sometimes not so good things. Yes, it's that part of the show where our guests choose one of their most fascinating relatives and then tell their life story. So, Danielle and Galit, who are you going to introduce us to?
Our grandfather, Yunus Dardashti.
Okay.
He had a life that's, almost the kind that you would hear only in a movie or in a fairy tale.
Okay, so where does this fairy tale begin?
He was born in the Jewish ghetto of Tehran, which was called Serchal.
Right.
And he, lived there. He was an orphan from the time that he was 7 years old, living with his uncle. And they moved out of the Jewish ghetto when Jews were emancipated under the Shah of Iran in the 40s.
Okay, yeah.
And really, the thing that he loved most in life was music. And his uncle really didn't want him to sing, even though he saw he had this amazing talent. So he had to sing in secret. And music ultimately was the thing that kind of, it seems, that sort of allowed him to kind of hold on and, to continue in his life, that gave him strength. And the crazy story about how he was discovered, our grandfather, he was at a party, and he was a Jew. He was a Jew living in Iran. But this was a time in the very early 1950s where Jews and Muslims were mixing a lot more, and Jews and women had a lot more rights. Things changed. There was a new Shah who took over and wanted things to be open, for minorities and for women.
Yep.
And so my grandfather was at this party with many other people of different faiths, with many Muslims and many important people in the room. And it's this crazy story that we tell in the podcast, which, it's hard to tell it and do it justice as we do in the podcast, but I'll give a little bit away and just say that he was discovered when the lights went out, all of the electricity went out. And he decided to sing. And everything else was dark, and suddenly all you heard was our grandfather's voice. People were like, who is that voice? Who is that voice singing?
Yeah, and there are metaphors upon metaphors and multi-layers to it, because Jews had only recently come out of the margins. And so maybe, singing in the dark was easier for him at that moment where nobody was looking at him.
Yeah.
And getting discovered, that power outage may have really been a gift for him, where he sang and a famous singer was at that party. She happened to be there, a famous female Muslim singer, and discovered him. And
he was in the right place at the right time, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a crazy fairy tale. And from then on, he talked about that story. We found a tape where he told that story. And he said it was like at that moment, he turned into the Nightingale of Iran. And that was the moment that everything changed.
Wow.
And so Andrew, after he was discovered, things just kind of moved very quickly, and soon our grandfather had the most coveted spot on Iranian national radio.
Wow.
That everyone would listen to in the whole country. People would be glued to the radio as our grandfather sang weekly. And he just went on to just do all these amazing things in Iran and was beloved among the mainstream Muslim population.
Okay.
And those are the stories that we heard growing up. And in this podcast, The Nightingale of Iran, we make a discovery about, what we didn't know about his level of fame.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the context for this is that he was also a religious Jew. And people are often surprised by the fact that he was such a successful singer and so popular among Muslims in Iran at the time. But it was a different place than the Iran that we know now, today.
Yeah.
This was before the Islamic Revolution, in a time when the Shah of Iran had really opened things up for Jews and women and minorities in Iran. They were given rights for the first time to vote, and Jews were allowed to move out of the Jewish ghetto and in integrated neighborhoods with Muslims. So our grandfather was coming to fame at a time that was a very different time in Iran for Jews than the 500 years preceding that, and then the years since then. So it was a very unusual time.
Yeah, I bet. Wow. Galit, obviously you've discovered a whole load of recordings of Eunice. What was it like for you to incorporate your grandfather's voice into your own music? And did you instantly feel like that was something that you had to do, or did you have a kind of a period where you were kind of anxious or not sure whether that was the right thing to do? What was that process for you?
Yeah, so actually the music I had found way before, some of it.
Okay.
I mean, all of these conversations that we're talking about, we had none of that. And all of, and so much more of the music we found later. But, I'm both an anthropologist who studies music and a musician. And so that's the only thing that I had kind of, all these years, many years ago, even in graduate school, I had found from my relatives in Israel. So I actually started playing around with my grandfather's music over 10 years ago.
Right. Okay.
And that, that's a big part of how we started this whole process is that, I've been playing around with my grandfather's music, and it had been something that I was really excited about because it was really my only way to connect with him and with his story. And as a musician, that was one way that I actually could connect with him. So I started taking samples of my grandfather's recordings of the prayers of called slichot, which are these prayers that Jews start chanting the month before the Jewish high holidays. And they're supposed to you're supposed to chant them nightly in the Middle Eastern and North African traditions. You chant them nightly, you come together and you chant these prayers, and it's supposed to basically put you in the right spiritual space for the Jewish high holidays, which are very intense. And, most of the recordings that I had heard before of our grandfather were of him singing in Persian, but these, I speak Hebrew. And so it was very exciting for me to connect with these recordings in Hebrew. And actually, it was a way in for me. And so I knew I wanted to do a project on it many years ago. And I started performing with it and sampling it and kind of recreating this ritual with his music. And that was my way of connecting with my Persian heritage.
Yeah.
So, once Danielle, and so that's a recording that I actually finally recorded last year. It's a project called Monajat, where I sing with recordings of my grandfather singing these prayers. And, we created music all around it with musicians. But then once Danielle found these recordings and she and I started doing interviews with people all over the world, we got to such a much deeper level in understanding our family history.
Okay.
And I was able to contribute a lot of what I already knew through the music and through, my contacts in the academic world. And we were able to go really deep with, combining our areas of expertise. Danielle is this incredible storyteller and documentarian. And so she and I together were able to kind of bring our skills together and really do some deep work on our family history and story.
And the theme song from the podcast series, Melech, is the first song on Galit's album Monajat. And she had just come out with that album about 6 months or a few months actually before she and I started really working hard on this podcast project together. And that song is just so incredible and seemed like a theme song for this project. And so it became our theme song. And also it's very interesting because on our family recordings that I found in the basement, Galit would say, "Oh my God, Saba," our grandfather, he just broke out into singing Monajat at the family Saturday lunch, or, which is one of the songs that she had mixed on her album from him singing on a professional recording. But there he was singing it in their house in Tehran on a Saturday afternoon, so it was pretty amazing. Wow. Yeah. To hear, to just hear them in their casual life doing things. We had this very sort of finite image of them. It's kind of like when you see outtakes from something that you've only seen the main photo shoot for. You know what I mean? It was, yeah. Yeah.
So, Danielle, I think you were part of a family group all singing, but my question to you is, what's happened to your singing?
Oh, I still sing. It never became, it's funny, Galit and I have a third sister, Michelle, who's the youngest sister. And it's like we all took a various aspect of our family traditions and ran with it. Michelle is a rabbi,
Right. Yep.
and I'm a storyteller, and Galit is a musician. And, we all kind of developed in various areas of our family tradition and really went crazy with them. So, yeah, we're all kind of, I'm very rabbinic in nature, and I'm also musical, but my thing is storytelling. And the three of us all kind of, are all three, Galit has done some clergying as freelance, and she's a writer and storyteller too, but she's more of the musician than any of the three of us. And Michelle is the spiritual one, and I'm the storyteller. But we're all kind of bits of all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like you are a mixture of your grandfather. Well, thank you, Danielle and Galit, for telling me the life story of Eunice Dardashti. But I think it's time for you to face
the brick wall.
Those dreaded research brick walls. Oh, I hate them. Yet, they're also quite addictive to chip away at. Sometimes they take hours, weeks, or decades, and then suddenly a little clue shows up from nowhere and turns those bricks to dust. In this part of the show, I'll be asking my guests to share one of their brick walls in a hope that one of you, dear listeners, might just be able to help them solve it. Right. Danielle and Galit, what have you got for us?
So the brick wall that we ran into in making this project, which still is, I wish we could crack this nut, is we have never been able to find any video or even photos of our father,
Right.
the teenage pop star in Tehran from 1961 and 1962. We found like one kind of distorted photo of in the studio, but not really any good photos even, and certainly no video, and no not even any audio of it, of him singing on TV.
Yeah, nothing.
We have tons of people that we've interviewed describing it, and our father describing it, but we have no footage of it, or audio, or photos.
So this was the most popular television show in Iran at that time. So we feel like there have to be recordings of it somewhere. And so we're hoping somebody out there.
Yeah, there ought to be something lurking somewhere.
Yeah, or he also was like a huge teen idol, and he performed in a bunch of concerts at that time, and we don't even have photos of that from when he was a teen idol. So if people out there have any knowledge of where we can find photos of our father, Farid Dardashti, on Iranian television in Tehran in 1961 and 62, our brick wall will be knocked down. Yeah, the spring of 1962 is the time period that we are just dying for something from them.
Yep.
Well, I hope that we can help you with this. So what's the best way for listeners to contact you if they think that they have a research clue or an idea?
So if anyone wants to contact us with this information about spring 1962 Tehran or anything else, they can reach us through nightingaleofiran.com, and then they'll get all the information there on our website about where to reach us, nightingaleofiran.com.
Perfect. Of course, listeners can also head over to familyhistoriespodcast.com, where they can read this episode's show notes and send us a message, or they can email us at hello@familyhistoriespodcast.com, and we'll pass it right along to Danielle and Galit. Now, my fingers are very tightly crossed for this one. I'd love this one to get solved. But while the listeners eagerly start rummaging through the records, I think I might just be able to help you solve this. But you're going to need to follow me through to the garage.
Wow, what's all this stuff?
This, Danielle, is my secret time machine.
A secret time machine? You're joking.
Why does everyone think it's a joke? No, this is a fully functional, scientifically calibrated piece of science.
Are you sure? It looks like it's made from bits of junk.
Is that a piece of a self-checkout from a shop?
Oh, what? Where?
Over there.
That? Oh, I'm afraid that's just a coincidence. That's actually part of a temporal hypertransference circuit.
Oh, okay. If you say so.
Anyway, I thought that as a sort of thank you for taking part today, that you might both like to pop back in time to try and solve your brick wall for yourselves. You know, sort of history as it happens. All you need to do is just take a seat over there and I'll get everything set up. Yep, that's it.
Unexpected item in the bagging area. Unexpected item.
Yes, behave.
What was that?
Oh, nothing. I just need to make an adjustment, really. I don't usually send 2 adults at once. Now, remind me of when and where you'd like to go.
Spring 1962, Tehran.
Excellent. There we go, all set. Now, you'll need these.
What's that?
These are temporal beacons. Just press the button on the top when you're ready to come home and you'll be back here in a flash.
Okay, got it.
Right, here we go. Danielle and Galit Dardashti, thank you, goodbye, and good luck. Spot on. Oh, finally. Would I like a... I'm a family historian. Of course I'd like a receipt. Thank you. The Family Histories podcast was presented and produced by me, Andrew Martin. My guests were the brilliant Danielle and Dr. Galit Dardashti. And if you've enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to tell all your friends about it. Thank you for listening. Approximately no family historians were harmed in the making of this podcast.